Good evening. Today we are starting the last chapter of PMBOK, that is the 10th knowledge area, Project Stakeholder Management. Well, this Project Stakeholder Management is very closely related with the Project Communications Management, though they are slightly different from each other, but somehow they have got a relationship and their behavior is also almost similar. The difference here is that in stakeholder management, we do have a process in initiation. As soon as we develop the charter, the very first thing we need to do in initiation is to identify the stakeholders. Remember, by that time, there is no stakeholder management plan prepared as yet. So identification of stakeholder comes before the stakeholder management plan was ever created. In planning, we develop the stakeholder management plan, and later on in execution, we manage the engagement of the stakeholders. While in control, we control the engagement of the stakeholders. Now, what is the difference between managing and controlling the stakeholder engagement is exactly the same difference what was in managing communications and controlling communications. That is the relationship I wanted to show you. So when we are executing, we are not putting the things right. We are just ensuring that the communication or the stakeholder engagement we had planned in planning is happening exactly according to the plan. We just ensure it, and for that purpose we interact with the stakeholders, we make the necessary communications, we keep them engaged, we give them the progress reports, we show them they are on board with us, and we handhold them, and ultimately we continuously manage the engagement with them. But remember, we do not change anything by ourselves. If there is something to be changed in the relationship, that would be done through a change request, and manage communication or manage stakeholder engagement will move a change request to integrated change control. In monitoring and control, we have got the control of communication and the control of stakeholder engagement. Now, these controls are responsible for evaluating and analyzing how well the communication and the stakeholder engagement was managed in execution. And depending upon the analysis, it can also move certain change requests in bringing changes to the communication management plan or the stakeholder engagement. So you see, why I am talking about communication and stakeholder together is because they both are related and they have exactly the same kind of behavior. Previously, stakeholder management was part of communication management. In earlier edition, in fourth edition, stakeholder management was just a process and it was basically part of communications. But later on they realized that stakeholder management is a big subject and that has to have its own knowledge area, and therefore they separated them. But naturally, if you have the stakeholders, if you know the stakeholders, there definitely has to be some communication amongst the stakeholders. And moreover, from the project manager's point of view, he has to keep all the stakeholders happy. So he has to keep them engaged, keep them updated. So that is the knowledge area of stakeholder management. Project stakeholder management, therefore, it includes the processes required, number one, to identify the people, group or organizations. So these are the stakeholders. If stakeholders could be people, they could be groups of people, or they could even be the organization as a whole, any organization for that matter. I am not talking about your organization. it could be any other organization also, that could impact or be impacted by the project. Now, what does that mean? It means anybody who can affect the project or can be affected by the consequence of the project. Both kind of people are the stakeholders. The person who is providing the funding for the project, who is giving orders for the project, is definitely a stakeholder. He is impacting the project. But at the same time, a person who will be impacted by the consequence of the project, like general public or people who are the affectees of the project, they will also be the stakeholders. And this is to analyze the stakeholder expectations and their impact on the project. Project manager must know, first of all, who are the stakeholders, what are their needs and expectations, and how do they impact the project. And thus, he would develop an appropriate management strategy for effectively engaging these stakeholders in project decisions and execution. These stakeholders are important to us. Uh, can you listen to me? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's clear.
Because I am getting a message that connection is not there. I don't know what is this nonsense. But anyways, now what I'm saying is that these stakeholders, I will have many stakeholders in my project. These are not one, two, or three stakeholders. There would be many big stakeholders, small stakeholders, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, you know, uh, those stakeholders who are positively impacting, those stakeholders who are negatively impacting, those stakeholders who are impacting the project, and those stakeholders who are impacted by the project. So there are so many stakeholders. And remember, when we identify the stakeholders, there is no one that who matters more and who matters less. Anyone who has anything to do with the project, no matter how big or small, must be identified as a stakeholder. That is a later subject, that what kind of strategy we will use with that specific stakeholder. This will be done once the stakeholders are identified. Then we categorize those stakeholders. Once we categorize those stakeholders, then we develop strategies for various categories of these stakeholders, and that's how we keep their engagement on the project. Stakeholder management also focuses on continuous communication with stakeholders. This is extremely important. You do not have to leave the stakeholder alone. Stakeholder has always to be communicated, always you must remain in connection with the stakeholder and keep listening to the stakeholder. Stakeholder needs and expectations are most important to the project manager, and moreover, project manager must keep the stakeholders updated on the progress of the project, especially what they really are interested in being updated. Naturally, every stakeholder would not like to know everything about the project. Whatever their needs and expectations are, whatever their interests are, you have to understand them and make them that information available. And that will make them happier. That will make them satisfied. That will make them engaged. And if there is something that these stakeholders are not comfortable about, it is the job of the project manager to make these stakeholders comfortable by making them understand the consequences of that decision. And if there is any conflict, this conflict has to be managed or removed or handled by the project manager. There is no way that you can leave a stakeholder alone or angry. Now, if there is a problem and one of the stakeholders is not really being happy with whatever is happening here, then that gives rise to an issue. When a stakeholder is not being convinced by you, he is not convinced by whatever you are saying, or he is giving you a need or an expectation which you think is out of scope of the project, such like issues will have to be escalated because you could not handle it. It was not in your power to handle it. So issue escalation process is initiated. That means the issue will be escalated to the next higher level, and if it is in that level's power, the issue will be managed or handled there. If it cannot be, then it will be further escalated, and at some level the issue will get resolved. So as I probably have said earlier, that stakeholders are so important that you can't simply say no to a stakeholder. There is no to the stakeholder. Stakeholder has to either be convinced or his issue has to be escalated and must be resolved at some level. Stakeholder satisfaction should be managed as a key project objective. It is so important. It is so important. You cannot leave a stakeholder uncomfortable. You have to put in all your effort, and that is exactly what we are trying to do in manage stakeholder and in control stakeholder engagements. So these are the four processes. Identify stakeholder is in initiation process group, and it comes immediately after the charter has been developed. And these are the only two processes in initiation. First is develop charter and then is identify stakeholder. By the time the stakeholder is identified, we still do not have a stakeholder management plan. But once we enter into planning process group, the first job is, as far as the stakeholders are concerned, to develop a stakeholder management plan. And this stakeholder management plan is a subsidiary plan of the project management plan. So it will form part of the project management plan. And this explains how are you going to keep the stakeholders engaged, what tools can you use, how can you interact with them, how will you be collecting their needs and expectations. And naturally, when do we interact with the stakeholder? The very first interaction after the identification of the stakeholder is when you are collecting the requirements. Collect requirements process of scope. That is the first point where you start understanding their needs and expectations. And you collect the requirements from them. And you are in close proximity of the stakeholder, closely engaged with the stakeholder, and you are at the process in communication with them. So during planning, when you are communicating with the stakeholder in while the requirements are being collected, while the activities are being identified, while the risks are being identified, so this is all you are interacting with the stakeholder, and stakeholder might be happy if you are involving him in all aspects of project management. But later on, first of all, if you don't engage him in the planning, the stakeholder will feel left alone and will not be in favor of you. Naturally, if you are not consulting him, then he would feel left alone, and ultimately, when somebody is talking about your project, he would say, "Well, I don't know because they don't give me enough attention. So probably whatever they are doing is wrong." This is why, because they you have not given him a confidence, you have not taken him on board. If you are communicating with a stakeholder would know that I am a part of the project and I am being involved in the planning, in every aspect of the planning. And then if somebody asks him about the project, this stakeholder is going to be the biggest champion of the project. He would defend the project. He would justify the project to all others. This is a great strength we can get. Now, you have kept the stakeholder along with you throughout the planning, but after you get into the execution, you forgot about the stakeholder and you are now busy in execution. You do not talk to stakeholder. Stakeholder will tend to again get angry. He would say, when the project manager needed my input, he was talking to me, and now because he knows everything and he is in execution, he is not even telling me what is happening. So we need to manage the stakeholder engagement. We need to understand what stakeholder wants, how much he wants, and we must keep him informed, give him presentations, make him available in all aspects of execution and show him how the things are happening. The system should be kept completely transparent. So as I said, in execution, we will manage the stakeholder engagement. Manage does not mean that we change something. We are just, hand holding the stakeholder, keeping him updated about everything and asking if he's satisfied or not. If he wants to give any input, we consider that input, and there is very much a possibility that we can move a change request to accommodate the requirements of the stakeholder. So he may raise issues, I may resolve them. But if I can't resolve them, I am supposed to be escalating those issues to the next level, as if at some level those issues must be considered and must be resolved. So throughout execution, you are supposed to be managing the stakeholder engagement, and in parallel, in monitoring and control, we would be analyzing how we have been managing the stakeholders, where we left out something and how that can be improved. So in control, we are specifically analyzing how we should have behaved with the stakeholder, how he expected us to behave with him, and how we actually did behave with him, and what is the gap, how can that be covered, or that gap be bridged, and if to bridge that gap, to make some amendments in the stakeholder management plan or the communication plan, we can move change request to integrated change control, and ultimately we can control the stakeholder engagement through that. So these are the four processes, and this is how we deal with the stakeholder. But as I said, and we studied the communication, communication has exactly the same kind of role, for leaving out the identify stakeholder. Otherwise, all the three processes, plan stakeholder management, we have a plan communication management. Manage stakeholder engagement, there we have manage communications. Control stakeholder engagement, there we have control communications. So they are very similar to each other, except for here we are hand holding a stakeholder, there we are actually being responsible for conduct of the communications amongst various stakeholders. So these are the four processes. Identify stakeholder is the process of identify people, group, or organizations that could impact or be impacted by a decision, activity, or outcome of the project, and analyzing and documenting relevant information regarding their interests, involvement, interdependencies, influence, and potential impact on project success. You could have read it yourself, but I am just reading it out to you. I have already explained what these things does. Planned stakeholder management is the process of developing appropriate management strategies to effectively engage the stakeholders throughout the project lifecycle based on the analysis of their needs, interests, and potential impact on the project success. Managed stakeholder engagement is a process of communicating and working with stakeholders to meet their needs and expectations, address issues as they occur, and foster appropriate stakeholder engagement in project activities throughout the project lifecycle. So this happens in execution. In monitoring and control stakeholder engagement happens, and this is the process of monitoring overall project stakeholder relationship and adjusting strategies and plans for engaging these stakeholders?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, please.
So these, as you said, mentioned many times, I mean, these things are overlapping and a bit confusing as well.
Mhm.
Um, Especially, okay, in general, they all look the same because main thing which is going on with the stakeholders is communication. And
Okay.
we can say like there's a little bit difference like in planned stakeholder management, we can say how we are going to, for example, their requests, process those things, how to update them. But managed stakeholder engagement, that is completely related to communication.
Okay.
So why we needed a separate, separate entity or separate process for it? Or if we can have an example, like what would be in communication and what is the difference in managed engagement?
Right. Okay, you must understand one point here. When we talk about the stakeholder, we are only concerned about our communication with the stakeholder. So we are continuously remaining in touch with the stakeholder, and we are looking after his needs and expectations. This is the communication between the project manager and the stakeholders. That's it. But in communication, it is not only the communication between the project manager and the stakeholder, but all the communication amongst all the stakeholders, who can talk to whom, what he should talk, what format he should talk in, what should be the frequency of those reports, format of those reports. Though that is a subject of communication that we do not address in stakeholder. In stakeholder, because stakeholder is very prestigious for the project manager, and he cannot get him angry at any stage or left alone at any stage. Therefore, project manager ensures that at every process group, these stakeholders are properly looked after. So if you would say, it is like looking after the stakeholders throughout the project life cycle. It is not only communications. Communication is something different. Communication, as I said, is not only between the project manager and stakeholders, but that could be between anyone and anyone. Any stakeholder can talk to any other stakeholder. The communication will ensure that those communication channels which has been opened are genuine, necessary, and how they are to be communicated, how this is being managed and controlled. This is the job of communication. So if you look at closely, they are completely different jobs, but they have got a little, intersection. Because here also we are communicating, but we are communicating only with the relevant stakeholder, not managing communication amongst other stakeholders. So communication is is in general communicating throughout the project, whichever channels are to be opened, how they are to be opened, and whatever communication actually has to happen on them. Now, once you talk about managing the engagement of stakeholder, maybe this communication is also written in the communication management plan. But in communication management plan, there are many other communications also mentioned and managed and controlled. Now you understand the point?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I got it.
Okay, right. Next is identify stakeholders, which is the very first process and which is in initiation, which comes immediately after the develop project charter. Here we have the project charter as an input. We have the procurement documents. Why are we having the procurement documents here and from where they have come? Can you tell me, Mohsen?
So from procurement management, and they would tell us what we need to procure, and obviously we need to take stakeholders' input into consideration for that? Maybe that's why.
No, 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 no. We are here. The purpose of this process is to identify the stakeholder. Identify the stakeholder. How could the procurement documents help us identify the stakeholders and from where these procurement documents are coming? You said it is coming from the procurement management plan. I agree with it. But how does it help in identifying the stakeholders?
Whoever is related to the procurement is a stakeholder as well.
Right, exactly. You see, when we identify the stakeholder initially, at that stage we have not yet started the planning, and we don't know what all will have to be done by ourselves and what all will have to be outsourced. When we go into planning, there we know, there we understand that when we do the make and buy decision, then we understand which jobs are to be done by ourselves and which jobs are to be done by some subcontractor. Now, when the make and buy decision is done and the statement of work is created, and based on the statement of work, we create all the procurement documents. These procurement documents are sent back to initiation to this process identify stakeholders as if the qualified sellers could also be identified as the stakeholders. Those people who can bid for these projects, who can be our subcontractors, so those could also be included in the list of stakeholders. That is why procurement documents is input here. So then we have the enterprise and environmental factors and process assets. Now, all the stakeholders we have identified, we have to analyze them. And for that, we will use the expert judgment and the meetings tool, and ultimately we'll create a long list of stakeholders, which is called stakeholder register. This stakeholder register is not only a list of the stakeholders, but it is also containing certain attributes about the stakeholders. Is it an internal stakeholder or an external stakeholder? Is it a big stakeholder or a small stakeholder? Is it a positive stakeholder or a negative stakeholder? And not only that, but also maybe some measure or figures for that, how big this stakeholder is on some scale, maybe some qualitative scale. In this aspect, stakeholder identification is very similar to risk identification. And the process of analyzing the stakeholders is also identical to the risk analysis. You remember we do the qualitative and quantitative risk analysis. Here also, we will first qualify the stakeholders and then quantify the stakeholders, and then we will be able to be the better judge. Proper analysis would then be created. But as such, qualitative and quantitative uh, analysis is not exactly shown here. Here we just say stakeholder analysis. But essentially that means that first we will broadly classify the stakeholders into various categories, and when the need be, then we can even quantify them in dollar terms, in the terms of physical money, how much this stakeholder is worth. So this will give us a fairly good analysis of the stakeholder, where do they stand, and then we will use certain tools by which we will assess how we should behave with these stakeholders. So we will design a behavior or our attitude towards different kinds of stakeholders or different categories of stakeholders, and that would be our strategy to deal with the stakeholders. So that strategy also is developed through this analysis. Essentially speaking, you are having only one output, and that is stakeholder register, but this is a very rich document. This is not only a list of stakeholders, but a lot of attributes, including your strategy for the stakeholders. In some cases, it is said that the strategy may not be included into the stakeholder register because strategy may be confidential. And stakeholder register is not a confidential document. In that case, we could have the stakeholder register and stakeholder strategy as two separate outputs. As you can see in this diagram, stakeholder register and stakeholder management strategy are two different outputs. Okay, then we move on to the stakeholder analysis, which I was just talking about. This is a method for developing a systematic and logical view of the information needs of the stakeholders and of the sources for meeting those needs. Based on this stakeholder analysis, we would be able to decide the strategy. Stakeholder analysis is a technique of systematically gathering and analyzing, now listen, qualitative and quantitative information to determine whose interests should be taken into account throughout the project, like who is more important for the project, not because is a richer person, but who is more important for the project. It identifies their interests, stakeholder interests, expectations, and their influence and relates them to the purpose of the project. That is more important to us. For us, the purpose of the project matters a lot. So all those interests, expectations, and influences of the stakeholders that relate to the purpose of the project, that is my focus. It also helps to identify stakeholder relationships with the project and with other stakeholders that can be leveraged to build coalitions and potential partnerships to enhance the project's chances of success, along with stakeholder relationships that need to be influenced differently at different stages of the project or phase. So we see we have to doctor the stakeholder influence. If stakeholder is my friend, I can influence him to behave in a certain manner as per the requirement of the project. If stakeholder is not my friend, then he is on dagger's drawn position with me, and whatever I say, he would negate it. So why to make the stakeholder your enemy? You want to handhold the stakeholder and take him along. Not only that, he would understand the project better, but he will be proven support for the project. Stakeholder analysis generally follows the steps described below. Identify all potential project stakeholders and relevant information such as their roles, departments, interests, knowledge, expectation, and influence. These all will be the attributes. When you identify the stakeholder, you will also identify relevant information about them. What is the role of this stakeholder in this project? Which department he relates to? What are his interests? What knowledge he is bringing in? What are his expectations? What is his influence level? So you will gather all this data. Key stakeholders are usually easy to identify. They include anyone in a decision-making or management role who is impacted by the project outcome, such as sponsor, project manager, and primary customer. So the key stakeholders are easy to identify because they are quite visible. But other stakeholders, you might have to hunt them down. You might not see them very visibly. So you have to really search for them, and you must not ignore. You must do some effort in identification of those stakeholders. Identifying other stakeholders is usually done by interviewing identified stakeholders and expanding the list until all potential stakeholders are included. Analyze the potential impact or support each stakeholder could generate and classify them so as to define an approach strategy. In large stakeholder communities, it is important to prioritize the stakeholders to ensure the efficient use of effort to communicate and manage their expectations. So if I can prioritize the stakeholders and I can deal with the most important stakeholders first, then probably that will benefit the project most. If I am wasting my time with very small stakeholders and I am not paying much attention to the stakeholder who is actually going to be providing me the funds, then probably that stakeholder, if gets angry, that project will not get the funding at the right time. Assess how key stakeholders are likely to react or respond in various situations in order to plan how to influence them to enhance their support and mitigate potential negative impacts. So if you perceive that this stakeholder may not take certain decision lightly and he would react to it, then you should prepare that stakeholder beforehand and handle the situation, mitigate it, and ultimately mitigate it in your favor or in the favor of the project. Right. So once you are trying to analyze the stakeholders, you can have different types of criteria. You know, as I said, we identify what are the characteristics of the stakeholder or the attributes of the stakeholders which are important to you. For example, I identify 10 different attributes: the influence of the stakeholder, the power of the stakeholder, the you know location of the stakeholder, and so on and so forth. So all of these points I can then prioritize and grade which is most important for me. For example, if power of the stakeholder is most important, probably I can give it the maximum weightage. Then maybe it is the influence of the stakeholder, then I can give it next highest weightage. And I can create a grading system by which I can grade various stakeholders in a list of priority. On the other hand, a simpler method could be created. You could go for the two major players, two major functions or features of the stakeholder and create a grid out of it. That grid could be a power interest group, power influence group, grid, influence impact grid, or a salience model. Now this could be anything. You know, on one axis you can show the power, and on other axis you can show the interest, or in place of interest you can have influence, or on one axis you show the influence and other axis you show the impact. In salience model, it is describing classes of stakeholders based on their power, urgency, and legitimacy. So whatever model you use, they are different models. Whatever model you use, you are basically trying to sort out or qualitatively analyze the stakeholders who is bigger than the others. This is a power and interest grid with stakeholders. This is one of the models which we just discussed. Just for your example, it is a sample. It is just an example. It is not a recommendation by PMI that you should exactly do like this, but this is a sample for you and you can adopt this or any other model. In this, he has taken interest on the x-axis and power on the y-axis. Now let us assume that in my stakeholder register, I have a column for interest and I have a column for power. And let us say that I have provided it a Likert scale of 1 to 10. Power from 1 to 10, interest from 1 to 10. Or it could be 1 to 5, it could be 1 to 3, whatever figure you want to come up with. But we have to classify them into some kind of Likert scale. Let us say it is 1 to 10. So there is one stakeholder, A. He, on the interest level, came out to be, say, 4. And on power level, he came out to be, say, 6. So he will be plotted at this point. Similarly, B is plotted here. That means in interest he is 6 and in power he is 9. C, in interest he is 6, in power he is 4. D, in interest he is 3 or 4 and in power he is only 1. So you see, all the stakeholders you have identified will be plotted on this graph. Now divide this graph into 4 equal quadrants. The quadrants will show the lowest bottom left quadrant is the quadrant of low power, low interest. The bottom right quadrant is a quadrant of low power, high interest. The upper left quadrant is high power, low interest, and right quadrant is high power, high interest. So all the stakeholders in high power, high interest, they are B, H and F. These are to be given special care because they are high on both sides. They are highly interested in the project as well as they exercise high power over the project. So they have to be managed closely. So the strategy which applies to high power, high interest could be managing them very closely, meaning what? That these are the people who have to be kept engaged the most. These are the people whom you will have the best relationship and they will be your friends. Now let's talk about these people who are high in power but they have not much of interest. And here we have only one stakeholder, A. So what are these stakeholders? These stakeholders are those stakeholders who maybe are decision makers, who maybe are funding providers, but at the same time, they are not much interested into the day-to-day working of the project and they do not want to get involved in that. They just want to hear about some topics of interest. For example, there is a banker who has provided funding for your project. What is his interest? His interest is reimbursement of the loan. Now, if you start telling him that today we have performed very well, we have these many people on site and we have created a tower and in that tower we can do this. So he is not interested in that detail. He only wants to know in what is your schedule of payment of the loan you have taken from the bank. So the only report he requires is maybe on a quarterly basis, and that is repayment of the loans. So do not overburden such a stakeholder who exercises high power but has low interest. Do not, confuse such a stakeholder with overburdening him with information. Just keep him satisfied. Give him only what he wants. Do not give anything extra to this stakeholder. Then we have stakeholders who have high interest and low power. Who are they? These are the end users who will ultimately be using the product of the project, but they have not much of influence, not much of power. They don't take decisions for the project. They have low power, but at the same time, they are highly interested because they are the beneficiary of that project. So such like stakeholders have also to be taken on board. They must be kept informed because we know we don't have to take any orders from them, but we should be kind enough to keep them informed what is happening on the project and how and when they are going to be benefited from it. So if they are benefiting, their expectations will be managed and ultimately they will be rather in favor of your project rather than complaining against it. Last but not the least is the bottom left quadrant, which is exercising low power and low interest. So they do not have much of decision power. They do not have much of interest in the project. So we just have to watch them. We just have to monitor them. And remember, these stakeholders do not stay where they are right now. As the project moves ahead, it is very much possible that a stakeholder moves out of this quadrant and enters into the top left, top right quadrant. He can move out. His interest can change. He can become more interested. And as soon as any change in the status of a stakeholder occurs, it should be noted, and we should start behaving in that manner. We should start applying that strategy which applies to him now. So if he moves from the keep satisfied quadrant to the manage closely quadrant, then our strategy to deal with A would change to manage closely. Similarly, all the stakeholders will keep fluctuating from these quadrants, and we will keep updated. We will also keep identifying new stakeholders. Stakeholder identification is not a process which is done only in initiation, but it is a continuous process, and it goes on throughout the life of the project. So all these stakeholders and even others which are not right now shown may be included in this quadrant later on. So this quadrant and the stakeholder register and all these things have to be done continuously, and these documents have to be kept updated as if we can use appropriate strategies to the appropriate stakeholders. Okay. This diagram, this figure shows how we can show the potential strategies for the stakeholders. We can list down the name of the stakeholder, their interest in the project, their assessment of impact, and what is the strategy we have selected to deal with this stakeholder can be written down here. As I said, the stakeholder register may contain these strategies, but if they are secret, if they are confidential, then they should be kept in a separate document, which is called Stakeholder Analysis Matrix or Stakeholder Strategy. Stakeholder register may contain identification information, assessment information, stakeholder classification information, and things like that. Then we move on to the stakeholder management. In planning, we develop the stakeholder management plan, and as I said before, this is the part of the project management plan. For this, the key benefit of this process is it provides a clear, actionable plan to interact with the project stakeholders to support the project interests. So the inputs here are the project management plan and the stakeholder list which we had already created, and enterprise and environmental factors and process assets, and tools could be the expert judgment, meetings, and analytical techniques. Why analytical techniques? Because we will analyze these stakeholders throughout the process of the life cycle. So we will have to redo the analysis. So analytical techniques will be required, and stakeholder management plan will ultimately be developed out of it, and project documents can also be updated. What the analytical techniques could be used? By the current engagement level of all stakeholder needs to be compared to the planned engagement level required for successful project completion. How much should you be engaged and involved with the stakeholders? Stakeholder engagement throughout the life cycle of the project is critical to the project success. The engagement level of stakeholders can be classified as, now what types of stakeholders you have? You could have a stakeholder who is unaware of the project and potential impacts of it, but he is actually a stakeholder, but he doesn't know that he is a stakeholder. So this kind of stakeholder is called an unaware stakeholder. Then we have a resistant stakeholder who opposes everything we do. He is aware about the project and potential impacts, but he is resistant to change. You will find these kinds of people very commonly in your organizations, that these are the people who are resisting the change. Then there are stakeholders who are neutral. They neither support the project nor resist the project, but they just observe. Then there are stakeholders who are supportive. These are, they understand the project and they support the project. Then last category is the leading. They actively involved into the project. They not only are aware about the project, they not only support the project, but they actually are involved. They lead the project towards ensuring project success. Now, what should be your strategy to engage these stakeholders? If a stakeholder is unaware, you must make him aware. If a stakeholder is resistant, at least convert him to a neutral stakeholder. If a stakeholder is neutral, make him your support. And those who are in support, they must be encouraged to lead. So this is the level of engagement you need to achieve. These are the analytical techniques you need to use. So here we have a table of stakeholder engagement, and here you see there are three stakeholders, and these three stakeholders, the previously this stakeholder 1 was classified as unaware, and the future state we want him to become a supporter of the project. So from unaware to we have to bring him to the support level. Stakeholder 2 was previously neutral, we want to make him a supporter. Stakeholder 3, previously he was supportive of the project and we want to retain him as a supporter of the project. So this is our strategy. This is how we are addressing each stakeholder. Can you listen to me? Mohsin, am I audible to
Yes,
you?
sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Because my computer says the network connection is broken. So I'm totally confused. Right. Stakeholder management plan should include the desired and current engagement levels of the stakeholder, as I just shown you, scope and impact of the change to the stakeholders, identified interrelationships and potential overlaps between stakeholders. You see, it is really very difficult to manage the stakeholders because they will have diverse requirements. I might have given you the story about the donkey. That example did I give you?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. So you see, you can't carry the donkey. Exactly. This is making everyone happy is just like carrying the donkey. But still, you should be very tactful and you should manage the stakeholders in a very pleasant manner and very useful manner. You should keep the project interest prime. Then stakeholder communication requirements for the current project phase should be noted and should be outlined. Information to be distributed to the stakeholders. What information is to be given to what stakeholder? Naturally, depending upon his needs and expectations, including what language, what format, what content, and what level of detail. Reason for the distribution of that information and the expected impact on the stakeholder. You have to, manage the stakeholder engagement, meaning what? Whatever results you want to achieve, you want to convert him from unaware to a supporter. So your expected impact through these actions should be that. Time frame and frequency for the distribution of required information to the stakeholders, and ultimately the method for updating and refining the stakeholder management plan as the project progresses and develops. Next is the managing of stakeholder engagement. Here, stakeholder management plan is required. Communication management plan is also required because here actually you are going to communicate with the stakeholder and the details of the communication are given in the communication management plan. If there is any, change log, what is a change log? There are two kinds of logs. One is a change log and other is a change request log. What is change request log? This is a list of all the change requests which shows their current status and all data about the change request along with the current status of the change request. So the result of a change request could be approved, rejected, pended or whatever. All those change requests which get approved, they become a part of change log, and change log will only contain the list of approved changes and data about that, and also that will monitor the status of the change, how much has been done in that change. So that change log is required as an input. And organizational process assets are required. Now we will use the communication methods from communication management plan, interpersonal skills and management skills again from communication management and other whole wide world. And ultimately, we will create an issue log. If there are any issues from the stakeholders, they have to be recorded in an issue log, and proper issue escalation procedure must follow. If there is a change request which must be moved, that can be moved from managed stakeholder engagement, which is an execution process. And as a result, project management plan, project documents, or organizational process assets can get updated. Managed stakeholder engagement involves activities such as engaging stakeholders at appropriate project stages to obtain and confirm their continued commitment to the success of the project. You have to keep them engaged. That is what we are doing. We are getting back to the stakeholder. We are reaffirming his commitment, and we are ensuring that he is with us. There are no dual agendas. We want to keep a transparent system with the stakeholder. We don't want to hide anything from the stakeholder, as if the stakeholder also does not hide anything from us. And we are on the best of terms as a friend. Managing stakeholder expectations through negotiation and communication, ensuring project's goals are achieved. And you can make it very clear to the stakeholder that project is prime to you, is of prime interest to you, although he is also important, but we must all be looking at the success of the project, right? We cannot only look at the stakeholder expectations, which is which may not be in alignment with the project goals. So whatever the stakeholder expectations are in alignment with the goals, we are ready to fulfill those. Addressing potential concerns that have not yet become issues and anticipating future problems that may be raised by the stakeholders. This is also the job of the project manager to contemplate, to see what the stakeholder can expect in future. Such concerns need to be identified and discussed as soon as possible to assess associated project risks and clarifying and resolving issues that they have been identified. Then in management skills, we will have to facilitate consensus between the project objective, influence people to support the project, negotiate agreements to satisfy the project needs, modify organizational behavior to accept the project outcomes. Then last but not the least is the control stakeholder engagement. This is the process of monitoring overall project stakeholder relationships and adjusting strategies and plans for engaging stakeholders. When we are in monitoring and control, still the things are under our own control. We can always move a change request and fix if there is anything wrong with the stakeholder engagement. Even if you have to change something in the stakeholder management plan, you even can do that here. The key benefit of this process is that it will maintain or increase the efficiency and effectiveness of stakeholder engagement activities. So you can rehash or improve those activities as the project evolves and its environment changes. So the input again here is the project management plan, which includes all the management plans like stakeholder management plan. Issue log is input into it, and that issue log, which we have just received from the managed stakeholder engagement, if we can, after analysis, we can convert it into a change request. The change request will be moved. The work performance data is also received by control stakeholder engagement, and it compares it with the stakeholder management plan, and after the analysis, it converts it into work performance information, which goes to monitor and control project work. Project documents are received, and ultimately project documents are updated as a result of this process. And we use expert judgment, meetings, and information management systems as our tools, and the outputs are naturally the work performance information, change request, and the updates to the project management plan, project documents, and organizational process assets. Information management systems, they provide a standard tool for the project manager to capture, store, and distribute information to stakeholders about the project cost, schedule progress, and performance. That could be some project management software or some other organizational software which could provide these details to the stakeholders, maybe through online access or whatever. It also allows the project manager to consolidate his reports from several systems and facilitate report distribution to all the project stakeholders. Examples of a distribution formats may include table reporting, spreadsheet analysis, or even presentations. Graphical capabilities can be used to create visual representations of project performance information. So this brings us to the end of stakeholder management chapter. Any questions?
No, sir. Pretty clear.
Okay, there is one more thing I would like to quickly discuss, and that is the ethics. So let me, where are the ethics? Let me see. Just a minute, I'll just get to that. You have got all the slides, Rosen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you would have this last presentation also, which is the ethics. You must go through that
Yes.
ethics slides very carefully, because this is also given at the end of your PMP handbook. Have the PMP handbook. At the end of the PMP handbook, there are few pages which is called the code of conduct. That code of conduct is all about professional ethics.
Okay, sir.
And I'll just talk a little about it, as if you can let me bring it in front of you. Just tell me when you can see the screen.
Yeah, yes, sir. I can see it now.
Okay. Now, this is the PMI Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct, and it is very interesting actually. It is divided into four parts, or kind of, you can say, the chapters or whatever. First of all, it discusses why they have created this, what is the vision and purpose of having the ethics for project managers. Then who are the people who are governed by this, and then what are the four values they are talking about, what is the structure of this code, and ultimately how they are measured. So the first thing is the vision and purpose of this. PMI says that we are committed to do what is right and what is honorable. Number one. Number two, it describes the expectations and the mandatory behavior about a project manager, about the ethics. So now, from a project manager, what should you be expecting, and what should be the mandatory behavior as an ethical project manager, that is described here. And once you have this, it instills a confidence in the project management profession and helps become a better practitioner. Now you can be an honorable person, and you would say that a project manager never lies, so I will not lie. Things like that. Then it helps you to advance your profession individually as well as collectively. At organizational level, you can apply these ethics. serve as catalyst for others to study. If they will see that project managers are so ethical, so other people will also try to follow you, deliberate and write about ethics and values. So your organization should have their own code of conduct. Who are being governed by this code? All the PMI members are being governed by this with this code. And those non-members who have ever acquired a PMI certification or who have ever applied for a PMI certification or who have ever worked as a volunteer in any capacity with PMI, these all are governed under this code of conduct, no matter if they are not even the members. Members are anyways governed by it, but non-members who have done any of these activities, they are also under this code. This code talks about 4 values: responsibility, respect, fairness, and honesty. And each one of these 4 values are given out in 2 different aspects. One is an aspirational conduct and one is a mandatory conduct. Aspirational conduct is that a project manager should do like this. The conduct we strive to uphold as a practitioner. Project manager should do like this. But you can't really measure it. This is the expectation of people from a project manager as a professional. But at the same time, this is not optional. But at the same time, it is not criminal not to do it. I said it is not mandatory. Aspirational conduct is not mandatory. But if you do it, it is good. But if you don't do it, then you are not fulfilling certain requirements, certain expectations of the people, but you are not committing anything wrong. You are not criminal. It is not a crime not to follow them. But if you do them, it is good. So there is nothing optional. You can't say that aspirational conduct is optional by nature, but it should be done. But if it doesn't get done, it is all right. Then is a mandatory conduct. If you don't do it, you are committing some kind of crime. This is necessary for every project manager to behave in that manner. Like these are the established firm requirements from a project manager. They limit or prohibit practitioners' behavior. Non-adherence causes disciplinary action by PMI Ethics Review Committee. First, coming over to responsibility. Responsibility means it is our duty to take ownership for the decisions we make or we fail to make. Now, this is very interesting. The decisions I make, I am held responsible for them. The decisions I fail to make, I am also held responsible for them. Why? Because if I fail to make a decision and cause damage to the project, then that is also not right and I should be held responsible for that. If I take a wrong decision and there is some harm coming to the project, I am again responsible. This is only the decision. Same thing applies to the actions. The actions we take or fail to take and the consequences that result. So the whole responsibility project manager takes it on. What is aspirational standard for responsibility? It says we make decisions and take actions based on the best interest of the society, public safety and the environment. This is your basic premise. Whatever decisions you make, naturally they should be in interest of the project, but at the same time they must also be in interest of the society, public safety and the environment. But if you can't do it, it is not a crime. But you should try to look after the interests of society, public safety and environment. Then we accept only those assignments that are consistent with our background, experience, skills and qualifications. We should not do something we don't know. We do not, falsely portray our skills. We fulfill the commitment that we undertake. We do what we say, what we will do. So a project manager is a man of commitment. When we make errors and omissions, we take ownership and make corrections promptly. This is important. Whenever we have committed a mistake, we should try to correct it. When we discover errors and omissions caused by others, we must communicate them to the appropriate body as soon as they are discovered. We accept the accountability for any issues resulting from our errors and omissions and any resulting consequences. We protect proprietary and confidential information that has been entrusted to us. This is something we never like to do. We make photocopies of the books. We make copies of CDs and software. We are basically thieves by nature. This is unethical. This is aspirational standard that we are not being responsible. Lastly, we uphold this code and hold each other accountable to it. These are the aspirational standards which are good to have. What about the mandatory things? In mandatory it says, we inform ourselves and uphold the policies, rules and regulations and laws that govern our work, profession and volunteer activities. So wherever we are working, we are supposed to learn the prevalent policies, procedures, rules and regulations, and we can't say, oh, I did not know that, that's why I committed this mistake. All the regulations are to be adhered to. No matter you are new or you are old, but you have to adhere to. If you don't, then you are punishable. We report unethical and illegal conduct to appropriate management and if necessary to those affected by the conduct. So this is my ethical responsibility. You know, if I see someone committing a murder and I do not report the crime, I am party to the murder. I am trying to protect that person. So this is criminal. Ethics complaints, we bring violation of this code to the attention of appropriate body for resolution. If somebody we see and project manager who is violating this code, especially the mandatory conditions, it is my responsibility to report upon him. We only file ethics complaints when they are substantiated by facts. And if I complain against someone, I should be able to prove it. I should not just malign someone and complain against him just for the sake of it, just to malign him. So I must have proper proofs, and if I cannot produce those proofs, I am also punishable. We pursue disciplinary action against an individual who retaliates against a person raising ethics concern. Maybe I have complained against you genuinely and you try to threaten me. So disciplinary action can be taken against you for threatening or retaliating against a person who reported against your ethical complaint. Next standard is respect. Respect is our duty to show a high regard for ourselves, others, and the resources entrusted to us. Resources entrusted to us are people, money, reputation, safety of others, natural and environmental resources. So we must respect all these things. An environment of respect engenders trust, confidence, and performance excellence. By fostering mutual cooperation, an environment where diverse perspectives and views are encouraged and valued. So aspirational standards are, we inform ourselves about the norms and customs of others and avoid engaging in behavior they might consider disrespectful. Like, there was a question that uh, in front of Chinese you are cracking jokes. So this is not ethical. This is not aspirationally ethical. We listen to others' point of view seeking to understand them. We should be active listeners rather than we don't allow anyone to speak and we always try to speak by ourselves. We approach directly those persons with whom we have conflict. This is the best way of resolving the conflict, that you confront that person and resolve your conflict or disagreement. We conduct ourselves in a professional manner even when it is not reciprocated. I am trying to, be nice to a person and he is abusing me. So I should not start abusing him. These are the aspirational values from the respect perspective. Mandatory standards about respect are: we negotiate in good faith. Whenever we negotiate, we do not have a hidden agenda. We must negotiate in good faith. We do not exercise the power of our expertise, our position to influence the decisions or actions of others in order to benefit personally. So we must not engage in personal advantage or personal benefit. We do not act in an abusive manner toward others. Then is fairness. Fairness is our duty to make decisions and act impartially and objectively. This is judicious use of your authority. Our conduct must be free from competing self-interest, prejudice, and favoritism. So the aspirational standard is: we demonstrate transparency in our decision-making process. We constantly re-examine our impartiality and objectivity, taking corrective actions as appropriate. We provide equal access of information to those who are authorized to have that information. It is not that I hide the information from others as if my relative can benefit. No, that is self-interest. So it is your ethical responsibility of fairness that you should not hide any information from others. We make opportunities equally available to qualified candidates, no favoritism. The main standard is: we proactively and fully disclose any real or potential conflict of interest to the appropriate stakeholder. If I have a little feeling that this job which I am doing is in conflict with the other job I am doing, then probably I must highlight it to my boss and seek his advice. If he says it is all right if you are working here and there as well and I don't mind it, then it's okay. But if you have not asked for it, then you are committing the conflict of interest. When we realize that we have a real or potential conflict of interest, as soon as I realize, we refrain from engaging in the decision-making process. We stop working on that job immediately and otherwise attempting to influence outcomes. So we do not take decisions unless and until we have made full disclosure to the affected stakeholders, we have an approved mitigation plan, and we have obtained the consent of the stakeholders to proceed. Favoritism and discrimination. We do not hire or fire, reward or punish, award or deny contracts based on personal consideration, including but not limited to favoritism, nepotism, or bribery. So simply these things are out, mandatorily out. They are crimes. We do not discriminate against others based on but not limited to gender, race, age, sex, etc. etc. We apply the rules of organization, employer, project management institute or others without favoritism. Last is honesty. Honesty is our duty to understand the truth. First, we must understand the truth, not the version of truth we want to believe. We must understand the truth and act in a truthful manner, both in our communication and in our conduct. Aspirational values: we earnestly seek to understand the truth. We are truthful in our communication and in our conduct. We provide accurate information in a timely manner. Why accurate information in a timely manner? Sometimes an information communicated late can be harmful for others. So in a timely manner. We make commitments and promises implied or explicit in good faith. We strive to create an environment in which others feel safe to tell the truth. No threatening. So you make it comfortable for other people to feel safe to speak the truth. Mandatory requirements: we do not engage in or condone behavior that is designed to deceive others. So this is very interesting. We will not be involved in anything which will deceive anyone, including but not limited to making misleading or false statement, stating half truth. You know, there was a question in the exam which I gave you earlier. Somebody was saying, yes, I have a conflict of interest, I may have a conflict of interest, but I have left that job. But actually he held shares with them. So it is a half truth. So half truths are not okay. Providing information out of context. You are asking me something, I don't want to answer that thing, and I start talking about something else, overloading with you with the information, or withholding information that, if known, would render our statements as misleading or incomplete. Lastly, we do not engage in dishonest behavior with the intention of personal gain or at the expense of another. So these are the ethical values, and then there is a glossary given in the code of conduct. You can read that. What is an abusive manner? It says abusive manner is not only that you are beating someone or humiliating someone. Conduct that results in physical harm or creates intense feeling of fear, humiliation, manipulation, exploitation. These all are abusive manner. And I have already explained the conflict of interest and other things. So anyways, you can read through it yourself, but I have covered almost all of it. So this is all about the PMP prep. Now, it is all upon you how you prepare. You can always get in touch with me. We can have yet other sessions for clarification of queries, for doing other things. You have got all the questions and material available to you. You can always practice that, and I am available. We can set up another meeting whenever you feel like, right? So any questions?
Sure, sir. Thank you very much. For now, it's okay. Definitely, I'll get back to you whenever I need because I want to do the exam as soon as possible. So
Okay.
I'll be in touch with you, inshallah.
So remain in touch with me, and
Yes,
we
sir.
can set up a meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank
Take care.
thank you so much, sir. Thank you for all your time.